Thank you for listening to Forever Shelfmates. As a small podcast, we rely on word of mouth and ratings to gain new listeners. If you like the show, please be sure to tell your friends, family, landlord, colleagues, anyone who will listen, and leave us a 5-star rating on the listening platform of your choice. Thank you, and enjoy the show.
Welcome to Forever Shelfmates, everybody. I'm Cheryl, and I love books, and I love to talk about the books that I read. And I'm a librarian, so I have a job where I get to talk about the books that I love to read. I'm here with my co-librarian and BFF, Mirele. Yoo-hoo! This month, we're back again with nonfiction. This time, we're discussing Mirele's pick, Fatty Fatty Boom Boom by Rabia Chaudry. Before we get started, our usual warning, we will be spoiling the book. So if you haven't read it and don't want to have it ruined for you, pause this episode, run out to your favorite local indie bookstore or a library of some kind and come back after you read it. Don't worry, we'll wait.
Shelfmates, shelfmates, reading books is what we do. Shelfmates, shelfmates, and we talk about them too.
I'm Cheryl. I like light and fluffy.
Mirele. I like dark, stuffy.
Shelfmates, shelfmates, we're so glad that you are here to hear us.
Let's dive in, shall we?
But before we get started, I would like to do the content warnings because there are some, and I think it's really important that if any of these things trigger you, that you do not read this book and you do not listen to the rest of this episode. First of all,
It's going to disqualify everybody.
I know it really is. There is fat shaming. There are eating disorders. There is domestic violence. There is animal death. I mean, I seriously murders. I texted Mirele in the middle of this book, and I'm like, our animal murders up to 3 now, and it is like on page because this is her story, and these things like happen to her pets. So, like, if that bothers you, don't listen to it. What else do we have to give a trigger warning for?
Consumption of pets.
Ew, please no. Actually, they don't eat the pets.
No,
they
the
don't
uncle,
eat the pets.
The uncle eats the rabbits.
Gross. Yeah, it has a lot to do. There's a lot of fat shaming, body shaming in this book, not by the author about herself, but literally everybody around her. And so we are very body positive here at Forever Shelfmates. And
Woo-hoo.
to say that it was a hard read is probably underselling, but if that triggers you in any way, please don't read this book. Anything else you think we should add before we get started?
No, but I do think there's a lot of positive things about this book, and we'll cover those as well.
Okay, so
Don't
Mirele,
let Cheryl scare you away.
I'm not scaring you away. I read the whole thing, but I have to say, like, there were times when I had to put it down.
Yeah.
I definitely, to me, as a curvier woman, reading this book was really, really hard, honestly. But that's not to say that it wasn't. She's a good writer, and I could hear her voice, but I did not like it.
Well, I did not like the fat shaming content. I did not like either. I was horrified at that. And the domestic violence, I didn't see that coming at all. Maybe I'm naive, but I really didn't see that coming. Those were the parts that, like, I would cut out. What I thought really made this book special was the relationships, learning about Pakistani culture. Like, I'm a culture junkie.
Well, let's give like a description
Yeah.
of the book so all of our amazing listeners understand what we're talking about. So Fatty Fatty Boom Boom is a memoir by Rabia Chaudry about her childhood growing up as a quote unquote fat kid. And she uses those words a lot, and everybody uses them around her.
And if her name sounds familiar, Rabia Chaudry is also the producer of Serial, the podcast.
Oh, I didn't know it was a podcast.
It was a podcast about the freeing of Adnan. What's his name? It's in the headlines now. He just got freed.
Oh, that's really exciting, because reading the book, it was like he's totally innocent, and I don't know the story because
Right.
I didn't as I never
Right.
do any research before we come here. We'll put a link in show notes to
Right,
some of this.
Right. So she's someone with quite a bit of clout. But yes, everybody around her, she grows up
She's born in
She,
Pakistan.
she is born in Pakistan.
Her parents are both Pakistanis and they immigrate to the United States. She is technically Pakistani because she wasn't born in the United States. But they come here when she's very young.
Like a toddler.
And so she goes from, and that was actually the part of the book I really enjoyed, was this like dichotomy of cultures, like the way she lived and the way her parents grew up in Pakistan, and then the difference when they come to the United States. That was fascinating.
That was really interesting. It was so stark. And her perception and her parents' perception, how they adapt to life in the United States. I love that kind of thing. And also the descriptions of her giant extended family, the history of her family. It's fascinating. I learned a lot about Pakistan through this book, and especially, let's not forget the focus on the food. I like this book because it described the cuisine.
Actually, Mirele, and I'll tell all of our listeners, the only thing that Mirele and I try not to discuss the books that we're reading for this until we're here recording. And so the one thing she did tell me was be prepared to crave Indian food, Pakistani food, like that type of cuisine for like a month. And in preparation for reading the book the past few days, I did in fact order Indian food. It was delicious, but yeah, go on, continue.
But you didn't find that to be true?
I mean, the descriptions of the food is amazing, but the problem is that I felt like in this book, every description of food carried this like shameful, I don't even know what to call it. It was just every time she ate something, it felt sort of like shameful. And so when she grows up and her parents in Pakistan, the culture, and this was fascinating. I would love to go to Pakistan to like, I hope it's still the same, but who knows, because she was born in the early 70s and her parents, like the way that they got food was that there was a market and they had fresh food every day, and you didn't go to the grocery store and do a huge shop. You like bought your meat the day the animal was slaughtered. You bought your fruit the day it was picked off the tree, and you only bought enough to make the meals you needed for that day. And it was like, that was the thing. And then when they come to America and it's like, well, you don't do that. You go to a grocery store and you buy prepackaged meat and you have to prepare it, but also you're working and it's not the same type of culture. And so she went from eating a lot of, I mean, theoretically, I mean, there's still a lot of fattening foods in Pakistani cuisine. I mean, there was the discussion of the like buffalo milk and how they made like the cream on top and then they ate the cream. I mean, like it was still fattening, but it wasn't as heavily processed, I think, as American food is. And so she went from eating these relatively like local, fresh, healthy-ish meals and then coming to the United States, and her parents really like were like, oh, this prepackaged stuff is super easy and I don't have to cook it. And
pizza was a novelty.
Yeah, pizza was like their favorite thing.
Yeah,
I love that Pizza
Italian
Hut
food
was the only place that her father loved the pizza from Pizza Hut. Like that was the pizza he would eat.
And when they moved, their neighbor was Italian, and that's the first time they ever were exposed to Italian food and lasagna and pasta, and it was just eye-opening to them.
They don't have noodles really in Pakistani cuisine.
And so what happens to, well, we can talk about what happens to the narrator, but she has a sister who ends up staying in Pakistan with the grandmother and the grandparents. And what happens is she is raised on Pakistani food with the fresh local ingredients. And she ends up being fit and not having any weight problems. And Rabia, I think it's Rabia, she comes to the United States and she's just surrounded by junk food a lot of the time.
Well, when it was interesting, because at the beginning, like this turns out to not, this is a problem that she has basically from the moment they arrive in the United States. I remember reading that like when she was teething or something, her parents gave her like cold sticks of butter to like, not like to help with the like teeth coming in, right? Because you want it to be cold and you wanted to numb the area. But she was just basically eating sticks of butter.
It's actually kind of a brilliant idea, like in moderation.
But
I want to
like,
try the cold stick of butter
Oh,
trick
God.
on, yeah.
That would be very, very interesting. But that was just like, so in the way that her parents, I guess, didn't quite understand American food issues, it became a lot of those types of things where they were used to these things being super fresh and not heavily processed. And then they come here and all of it is heavily processed, and yet they still do these things. And so she starts out her life as a child being overweight. She's a chubby kid.
Don't they feed her in the very, very beginning? She's underweight. She has jaundice. And so
When she's born
When she's
in
born.
Pakistan.
and somebody, no, I think her skin tone is yellow, and somebody says, don't breastfeed her, give her half and half in a bottle.
Oh, yes.
And the half and half will do two things. It'll plump her up and it'll turn her skin white. And here we get into another disturbing thing.
Oh, racism.
Racism, the fact that in Pakistan, people with lighter skin are considered favorable, and
Great history of colonialism and
Right.
imperialism here, that the white
Yeah.
people are,
so
quote, more or better than the darker skinned people.
and
Like,
did
good
you,
job.
and
Good
did
job,
you know,
imperialists.
good job, imperialists. Did you know, Cheryl, that if you drink half and half and only eat mostly dairy products, your skin will get more pale? Did you know that?
I did not.
Well, it's a fact according to this book. And that
No, it's a fact according to the person in the family.
yeah.
Because let's be clear, Rabia Chaudry is not making the argument that half and half will lighten your skin. Okay, so let's be clear.
Yeah.
This is from some relative who was well-meaning and yet failed spectacularly on many fronts.
Yeah, and this was that was just such a wrong assumption, but it's kind of like folk-ish, it's like folk remedy. And I found that there were a lot of like folk remedy things. in
Oh yeah,
this
especially
book
when she
that were
becomes a teenager.
fascinating.
Yeah, especially when she's a teenager and
Yeah.
like she's very self-conscious. She recognizes that she's not thin like the American people are, like other Pakistanis are. She recognizes that her hair is kind of greasy and her mom just isn't willing to help with it. And so they just kind of chop it off so she looks like a boy. She has not clear skin, as many teenagers don't have clear skin, right?
And she moves to a neighborhood. Where did she move initially? To New Jersey?
Well,
I
she
think?
moves at lots of places. So
Yeah.
her father is a veterinarian and he works for the USDA. And so they move around a lot of places in the mid-Atlantic. So they start actually in like our neck of the woods, suburban Virginia. And then they move to suburban Maryland, and then they move to Delaware, and then they move to, I think, southern Pennsylvania, and then they sort of end up in Hagerstown, Maryland, which is not that far from where we are.
And apparently has a huge package.
Well, now it does, but when they first moved there, they were like, it wasn't compared to, southern Pennsylvania, where there were no Muslim families, no Pakistani Muslim families. Hagerstown had like 5 when they moved there. And then she said it grew, like the whole community grew while she lived there and as she grew up. So she moved around to a lot of places. So she was in Delaware for a while.
So when she was in school, she was like one of the only brown kids there. So she really stood out.
And people would make fun of her food because it had, quote, weird names. And so she had no friends. I mean, she says how alone she was, and that probably didn't help with the food. I sort of read it as a food addiction.
Right. She developed an eating disorder because of the stress of
being alone, being
Yeah.
different.
That
And
was
it didn't-
painful to read.
And it didn't help, I think, that she had already started, like, that all of these things that happened in her childhood that sort of like set her up for failure, like the stick of butter and the half and half in the bottle and all this stuff.
And her relatives even call her to her face. She has uncles who said lovingly call her fatty or like fat.
Yeah,
face.
like when she goes to Pakistan, the first time when she goes to Pakistan and her grandfather sees her and he basically says, like, what have you done to her? Because she's this fat kid. And he's like, no one's ever going to marry you.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
they
that
say
was
these things, and they say
heartbreaking.
these things literally to her face, that they call her, like, as you said, lovingly, they call her Fatty to everybody. Like, that's her nickname. They tell her that they don't have any idea who she's ever going to marry, because no boy's ever going to want to marry a fat kid. Right. And they say these things to her face. I was just, oh God.
It was horrible. And what I had trouble understanding was she had a good, close relationship with the uncle who was calling her a fat
Yeah,
face.
she's like not, I mean, she was bothered, but like not enough. I mean, it was so sad.
Yeah, she internalized it. And then you see who she ends up dating, but we'll get there.
Yeah, we'll get there. We're still in her like teen years.
Yeah.
And you know, and she talks about her secret eating. And that was heartbreaking. And so she feels oh, and we also should say, before we get to the secret eating, at some point she does try to exercise. You know, people get really worried about her weight. They tell her so, and she's like, okay, I can do this. I can go and run. And she really makes an effort. Like, she goes to the school and she runs around the track, and, you know, she builds up some stamina, and she loses a little bit of weight. And then everyone in her life sabotages her. Like, she sees relatives and they're like, oh, eat.
Yeah, that was the most, I couldn't stand that part where she's finally, you know, taking a little bit of control over her life. And then the same relatives who are criticizing her and telling her you'll never get married. And then they push her with all this terrible stuff.
Yeah.
And it's like they want her to fail.
There's no way for her to succeed, because if she loses the weight, it's like, oh, you're sick. Oh, something's wrong. Eat. And when she does eat, it's, well, you're too fat. You're never going to marry anybody. No guy's ever going to want you.
It's the family dynamics are very cruel, very, very, very cruel.
And her parents, you know, giving them some credit, they do at some point stand up for her and say, like, she's healthy, she's young, she'll grow out of it, right? Like, leave her alone, but not enough. And then when it really does seem to become like a medical issue, they help sort of, but not really.
Yeah.
And they don't really change their family eating habits.
Right.
And then she starts her secret eating. So she gets to be 16, she gets her driver's license in a car, and she gets
a job at McDonald's.
No,
right?
that's her sister.
No,
she gets the job at McDonald's. She has the job somewhere else, but she literally goes and buys McDonald's and other fast food. And her comment is, the backseat of my car is always empty wrappers. And at some point, I don't remember whether it's later when she's in law school or whatever, she's like, I'd eat McDonald's 3 times a day. Yeah. And I was like, oh God, do you remember that? Yeah. Do you remember that documentary, Super Size Me? And how badly his health deteriorates after 1 month of eating all that McDonald's.
Right.
So then she goes to college, and she finally lives away from her family for the first time.
Wait, you skipped over some of the pet scenes.
Oh God,
it's not funny. I actually think it's a little bit funny. So you feel bad for her, right? But you're going to feel more bad for her.
Oh God.
Because it turns out, like, every single pet she's ever loved, her dad's a veterinarian, so she's had different pets.
And also she recognizes that, like, I think, you know, when you're a doctor or veterinarian, right, like, you recognize that, like, some animals are not pets, and you have like a healthy distance.
Right.
I did not have healthy distance when reading these parts.
Okay. So it turns out in her life, whenever she has a pet that she grows really attached to, it gets murdered. So the first time, it's a bunch of chickens, right?
Well, she has this chicken so this was the saddest. Oh my God, this was like a really sad story. So her father worked as a like veterinarian for the USDA in like the Purdue chicken area, which is, I think, historically on the eastern shore of Maryland, which is why they live in Delaware. And her father was like behind a Purdue chicken truck or something. And this chicken like flies out of the truck, and he's a veterinarian. So he stops and he sees the chicken, and the chicken was bred. God, this is terrible. It was such a big chicken that the chicken couldn't hold up its own weight on its legs.
Right.
And so he like inspects the chicken, and the chicken seems perfectly healthy otherwise. So he brings the chicken home, and the family immediately like adopts the chicken, and they call it Bonnie. But Bonnie never really regains control of her legs. The funniest part was like Bonnie's like scooting around on her butt everywhere, right?
But at least she starts to move.
Yes.
She starts to get her quality of life improves
Yes.
greatly when she's adopted.
Which didn't make me feel good about the American chicken industry. And I know they're like documentaries and like
Right,
stuff
right.
about that, but like I don't want to know.
Right.
This is one of the reasons I'm mostly vegetarian at this point. And then they find a duck. I don't know where the duck comes from. I can't remember.
They're best friends.
And so the duck and the chicken bond, and they're best friends, and the duck's name is Bill. And so do you want to tell what happens to Bonnie and Bill?
I do. And Rabia, meanwhile, has no friends because she's a social outcast. And so one of the only positive things in her life is this adorable friendship between her pet duck and her pet chicken. And I believe one day, because they live in a suburb, a fox, am I right?
No, it's the dog across
Or
the
the dog
street.
across the I haven't read this in a while. The dog across the street gets into their yard and eats them.
And all that's left is like feathers and blood.
And she comes home to that. And her mother is just so cold about it. She's like, clean it up. She says that to her.
I don't remember that part, but like it's interesting because like when they talk, so they give like a history, like in Pakistan, like it's not traditional to have pets.
Yeah.
Animals are for food,
Mm-hmm.
or they're working animals, right? So in Pakistan, they don't have this culture of like these adorable pets, which is one of the reasons the dad thinks that as a veterinarian, he'll have better prospects in America, right? Because we Americans love our pets. As you know from previous episodes, Mirele and I love our pets.
We do, except disclaimer, I love my hermit crabs so much that I'm actually giving them to the local preschool. And the reason why, because nobody
That's
is
a good gift, though.
no one is playing with them.
Yeah.
Nobody is taking care of them except me. And this was not what I signed up for.
Yeah.
And I know that they can have a really happy, fulfilled life
Yeah.
with other hermit crabs
Yeah.
in a bigger tank.
Oh, that's so sad, but I'm glad that they'll have a better life.
Yeah, we want to give them a better life. And my argument to my son was, he's like, well, I don't really want this. I want a dog. I said, you couldn't even succeed in taking care of these hermit crabs. There's no way.
Yeah, the dog. And my mom said the same thing when we got dogs. Like she knew that the dog was her responsibility. And the truth is, like, my mom was very bonded with our dogs.
Hermit crabs are a little bit harder to bond with.
That's true.
They're sweet, but
it's like when I had fish. I had Squishy and Farty Pants were the first pets that Jonathan and I had when we got married, and they were our two fish, and we didn't bond to them nearly. I mean, they still talk, and we still talked for them, right? In the same way we do for Max the puppy. But like Max is the first pet that I feel like I've bonded to. So.
They're more human-like.
Yeah.
And they follow you around. Like a hermit crab is in a little cage.
Yeah.
You have to take it out. You can't not look at it because it'll run away somewhere. Okay, enough about that.
Anyways, we digress. But like, so there is this culture in Pakistan that like animals aren't pets. And so that could possibly explain some of the mother's coldness. But like, I read that book and I put it down. And at the time I read that part, it was like 10 o'clock at night. And I'm like, oh God, I need to read a really happy book if I'm going to be able to go to sleep. And I was so sad, which is why we made the disclaimer at the beginning, right? Because I was just like, oh my God. But then we have the second pet murder.
And actually, this one is hilarious.
This one is even worse because it's intentional.
It's hilarious.
So remember how we said that like in Pakistan, they don't have pets and they're either food, okay, or working animals. But for this part, let's think about that they're food.
Yeah.
So
when one's uncle from Pakistan visits,
and you have some bunnies that are your pets in the backyard,
you should probably brief the uncle on the rules of the house. Actually, he didn't really care. He knew that Rabia loved them and they were her beloved bunny pets at a time when she just needed a friend. And one day
she opens the refrigerator door and there's like meat inside. And she's like, asks her mom, like, what's the meat? And she's like,
the mom, yeah,
it's rabbit.
because the
Well, she
uncle,
goes out to, I think she goes out to see, and the bunnies are missing from their little like bunny crate or whatever. And she's like, "Where are my bunnies?" And like the way she writes it, it's so funny, but it's also like super heartbreaking.
yeah,
It's like she's a very good she's a very good writer, and
She's a good
puts she's a
storyteller.
good storyteller, and there's a lot of humor in this, but when it boils down to it, it's like, oh my God, he killed her pets
yeah,
for food. And apparently like he was in the Pakistani army, and so they got used to like killing rabbits and squirrels and things you would find like in nature, like when you're out on like patrol and stuff. And so like to him, rabbit meat is delicious.
Right.
And I was just like,
and the mom knew how devastated Rabia would be, so she kicks the uncle out of the house, so he's not even home.
and they get rid of the rabbit meat. Like they don't
Yeah.
actually eat the rabbit
Yeah.
meat, but like she's just like, where are my bunnies?
It's so heartbreaking. There's so
Yeah.
many heartbreaking things about this story. Okay, so now let's go to more heartbreaking, where she goes to college.
Yes.
She gets into college.
She's alone for the first time. So it's not like, and there's a huge discussion of like the culture where as an unmarried woman, she's supposed to stay at home and live with her parents until she marries. And then she's supposed to move into her husband's families. And there's this whole description of how marriage works in the Muslim Pakistani culture, which was absolutely fascinating and interesting. And I loved that part. But so this is the first time she's ever lived on her own in a dorm with a roommate. This is the first time she's met anybody who's not Pakistani or Muslim.
And it really does her some good. She
Yeah.
starts to find herself and have friends, and I think to some extent become more confident.
Yes, but she also discovers the dining hall and
Yeah.
where she can eat as much as she wants. And there's nobody there to tell her to stop.
Right.
She becomes very addicted to Coca-Cola, which during the 80s, we can safely say had a little bit of cocaine in it. That was, I think, the secret ingredient in the 80s. And then I don't know if it was they got caught or whatever happened, but they had to take the cocaine out of it, which like, thank goodness. And she writes about that too, that like she didn't know, and she was drinking like liters upon liters of Coke.
Right.
In fact, one of the times she tries to diet, she basically says, well, I figured out how many calories were in liter of Coke. And I realized that I could not eat food, so I could just drink Coke.
And she does lose some weight that way, but
then she can't walk because she has no energy because she's not eating anything.
Yeah,
I mean,
crazy. But she meets this guy. Well, she meets a couple of guys, and one guy is interested in her. No, they're both interested in her, but she's only interested in the short, kind of smirky looking guy. And he takes an interest in her.
Yes.
He's Pakistani
Muslim.
Muslim.
Yeah. And he's also, I think, from Pakistan. So like his parents are still in Pakistan, and that becomes an issue when he decides he wants to marry her. And her parents are like, no, not until his parents come. And like, this is how it's done. And we're not going to let you get married. Also, you're 19, you're in college. Like, we want you to be a doctor. If you get married at 19, you're definitely not going to become a doctor.
Right. But somehow she convinces them that they really do want to get married, and he courts her. And I really didn't see that he was going to turn so despicable. I didn't see that.
No, and
it's
very unclear. It's very unclear. Like when they're dating, he seems attentive. He seems kind. He waits for her, right? And this is for a girl that everyone in her life has basically told her no one's ever going to want to marry you. And here's this guy who is reasonably attractive. Like, he's not horrible looking.
I looked everywhere for a photo of this guy.
She doesn't name him either.
No,
to be fair, she talks to him
everywhere to try to find a photo of this guy.
He's referred to as AK. Those are, I don't know if they're his initials or whatever, but that's how she refers to him in the book. And when they're dating, she refers to him as my future ex-husband. And
which is a very interesting way of introducing him, because then it really made me intrigued.
Yeah, like, so we already know this isn't the person you're ending up with. And me being the romantic that I am, is like, oh, you got to find your like person. It's gonna be great, right? and so like, and he waits, right? And his parents come over from Pakistan, and they finally meet her parents, and permission is given, and they get married. And like, what is it, like 6 weeks after the wedding is when he hits her for the first time.
Yeah. And he's like, he hit me for the first time.
Yeah.
So then, there's going to be more hitting.
I mean, there's definitely, I think, research about how abusers can take on these like super attentive, super like they lure you in, right? And then the abuse starts and women don't leave because they think it's their fault. I mean, she definitely is like, I must have deserved it at the beginning. And then she
really hard to read.
I mean,
That's hard
it's
to read.
the domestic abuse part was really, and she gets pregnant. At the beginning, she's on birth control because she's still in college and she wants to finish college. She's like 20 at this point. She wants to finish college and she's on birth control. And like 3 months after the wedding, people are like, so are you pregnant yet? Where's the baby? And she feels so horrible about herself that she throws away the birth control. And 3 months after that, she's pregnant. And so he's abusing her and she's pregnant.
Yeah, it's a great combination. And then she does give birth to a healthy baby girl. And now starts the part of the book where she really fights for her freedom and to reinvent herself. And there's a tremendous inner strength that comes out. It's almost not human. I don't even know where it came from.
See, and I didn't see it that way. I saw it as a woman who is deeply unhappy and doesn't know how to get out of any of the situations that are making her unhappy, right? Like she doesn't see a therapist. So like a lot of this is stuff she's doing on her own. So maybe that's where the like inner strength came from. But she decides she wants to go to Pakistan and visit her family. And so she takes her daughter and they go for an extended time. So she goes to law school. After she graduates college, she goes to law school. And that's when, I can't remember if that's when she eats.
I think she's working full time also.
Yeah,
she's
working.
The most exhausting schedule.
And she's also expected to cook because she's now living with her husband and his parents. And she's expected to cook for them and she's expected to clean for them on top of going to law school and taking care of a, baby, a toddler, right? And she's being abused. And so she finally it's like, I'm about to finish law school. Before I take the bar, I'm going to go to Pakistan and visit my family. I haven't been there in years. And it's like the first step to the independence. But I just sort of felt there's a number of steps of like, I don't know how to get out of all of these miserable situations I'm in. And this is a way to run away from them.
Yeah, I was just so amazed at how, because when she marries this guy, she's essentially enslaved by her in-laws and that side of the family. And the cooking and the cleaning, I mean, she becomes.
And they know about the abuse and they don't say anything. They're like, if you were a better, wife, he wouldn't hit you.
And it's just awful. And she's like sleeping 4 hours a night in order to like fit in her law school classes. And she's just saying to herself, if I can just get this degree, I can make enough money that I can get away from him. And that's what she does.
Yes.
And that was tremendous and inspiring. And then you got the icing on the cake, Cheryl, which is she meets the love of her life.
Well, but first she sort of tries out, like she joins a gym and she exercises a lot.
Yeah. Okay. So I did not enjoy hearing in depth about all her weight loss attempts. For me, that was just, I didn't. Listen, it was painful and I didn't want to hear about it. And that wasn't the interesting part.
Well, but also I have to say, and this was part of it when we get to the end, that we'll talk about what she does at the end, where she's now a happier person. But I really truly believe that no matter what size you are, you deserve love and someone will love you. It doesn't matter the number on a scale. It doesn't matter what size clothing you wear, right? If people can't see the you and love you for who you are, they're not worth your time. And so like, to see her make all these attempts because she thinks it will make her happy, right? Like that's not what's going to make you happy. It might make you feel more confident, which is sort of like what happens. Like she goes to the gym, she exercises a lot, and she has more confidence. So then she does go out and meet the love of her life.
And the love of her life, guess what? He's also struggling with his weight.
Yeah.
And so when they decide to, so that's the kind of nice part is because like, then when she wants to have a healthier lifestyle, he does too. And they're kind of doing it together like partners. And I didn't sense from him that it was like, you need to do this. I felt like he was just a better person all around for her.
Well, yes. And he, is a much kinder, gentler person, clearly. And
you can see his photo if you Google it.
Well, okay. I did not do that. Maybe I'll put a link in show notes for that. But no, so then they have a child
They have 2 children.
Well, they have the first child when she's in her 30s. So she has her first child in her 20s, right? She marries the abuser and has a baby. And then has the second child in her like early 30s. I think it's like 33, 34. And then she has her third child in her 40s. She doesn't even realize that like she could get pregnant in her 40s. But she and her husband struggle with weight, and they go up and down. They have moments where they are more into exercise and eating healthy. And then when life gets busy, when you have children, it's just easier to do the easy thing. And there's food everywhere in the United States. And so they gain weight. And so it's this sort of yo-yoing. And I think that of all the things that I definitely didn't like about this book, the discussion of the diet, the discussion of the yo-yo weight, like I just really, and like it's in the title, right? So I shouldn't have been so surprised, but it really bothered me. And it bothered me a lot because I felt like she was fat shaming herself. And I don't know whether it's because in this country, there's a lot of negative like media around weight, like you're not worthy unless you are thin.
Yeah.
And that's a bunch of bull honky,
Yeah.
right? But we're fed this like myth, and yet we have McDonald's on every corner. We have the Starbucks that like, it used to be that whole milk was the default. So if you wanted something healthier, you had to actually ask for it, right? Like there aren't salads on every street corner. There aren't like farmers markets on every street corner, and healthy food is more expensive than the cheap stuff you can get at McDonald's, right? Like this is a huge problem in the United States. And so like part of the book that I just didn't like was this whole attitude that if she's fat, which she calls herself, I don't like that word, but she uses it a lot. But like, if you're fat, it's a problem.
Yeah. And just the discussion, it was excessive. Well, I guess it's not excessive if you enjoy hearing about someone's struggles with weight loss.
I definitely don't enjoy that at all.
I didn't enjoy that part. And I didn't enjoy the cruelty. I didn't enjoy the domestic violence. You would think, oh, Mirele really likes the dark stuff. Not that dark. Well, I liked the bunny killing. I thought that was hysterical.
Well, and the funniest part is when you said like you'll crave Indian food for like a month afterwards.
Yes, because there's so many descriptions of delicious.
No. But here's where I felt. The second I finished reading it, I was like, I need to go for a walk because I need to exercise more.
No,
that's how I felt.
That's not the message you're supposed to get from this.
Well, but here's the problem.
Pakistani food, and there's recipes in the back.
Yeah, I couldn't read the recipes. I was so angry at the book. I really was.
Wow.
So let's get to the end of the book where she gets weight loss. She gets gastric bypass, and she does not tell any of her family members. She tells almost no one. I think her husband knows, and that's about it. So she goes and gets that gastric bypass, and she thinks this is the miracle solution because she won't be able to like eat. And part of the eating for her is mental, right? If there's food in front of her, she is eating it, right? But if she apparently has the gastric bypass, she assumes that she won't do that anymore. So she goes and does it, and then kind of promptly ignores all the things about your diet that you're supposed to change when you get gastric bypass. And so she doesn't lose as much weight as she thinks she's going to, and compared to the other people that get the gastric bypass. So that's starting it. So that's her first like serious effort to do this. And then she decides, she talks to like her friends, and she's doing, I think the podcast or whatever, they're doing a documentary or something, and she's going to be on camera. And she's like, I can't be on camera with the way I look, which also incredibly problematic, right? So she decides so her friend recommends get a personal trainer. Now, I don't know if you've ever looked into how expensive personal trainers are. They are not cheap. Right. So this is a very like wealthy privilege kind of thing. Right. So she gets a personal trainer, and she goes to the gym 6 days a week. And that's when she loses the weight. And so like she says, like her goal is to lose, I think it was like 40 pounds so she can be on camera and not look horrible. Yeah. And she does. And that's when she feels better about herself. And so the whole epilogue is like, I feel so good about myself now that I've lost the weight and blah, blah, blah. And that's why I was like, oh God, I need to go for a walk. I need to exercise, right? Which is not the message I wanted from this book, and not a message that I feel like anybody should have to feel like, right? Like I'm perfect the way I am. Right. And the point is to be comfortable in your body. And like, she finds that comfort only after she loses the weight. And that's
interesting.
It's terrible.
I saw it more like I guess maybe my attention was more hooked by the inspiring part of how she got out of this horrible abusive relationship, and she managed to like find financial independence and put herself through law school with her kid and find a loving, caring partner. So that part at the end, I don't know, that's what I was focused on. And then the yummy recipes. So I guess when I was reading the parts about her weight loss journey, I was just kind of bored by it. So I sort of skimmed.
See, and I skimmed some of the other stuff, right? Like, yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
like, I
yeah.
think the other problem is that when you do struggle with weight, which like I do struggle with weight, and I go to the doctors and like, and it's gut wrenching when you go to the doctor and they're like, we'll lose weight. And it's like, okay, if it was easy, everybody would do it. Please stop saying this to me because I don't want to hear it anymore. Right. Like I have been in many situations where I have tried to lose weight. I did CrossFit for, she attempts CrossFit and she gives up after like 2 weeks because it's miserable. Right. But like CrossFit made me feel strong and powerful. And I lost a lot of weight doing it. And I also messed up my back because CrossFit doesn't take into account that people are different and you're pushing heavy weights and people who don't necessarily have the right form. And like, I have a slip disc in my back now because of this. So like exercise is hard for me. And every doctor I go to is like, oh, you need to lose weight. Well, thank you for that. So like, maybe I'm overly sensitive about that topic. And so like getting to the end of the book and the message being like, well, the second I lost the weight, I felt better about myself.
Oh my God.
And I was
now
like,
I feel terrible that I didn't mean to like.
No, but like there were definitely parts of the book I liked, but like the part that really pissed me off was when she was like, oh, well, I got a personal trainer and then everything fell into place. And then she had to get plastic surgery because like when you're heavily overweight and you lose a lot of weight, you have skin that then you have to do something with, which I was like, oh, gross. So she like had to have like a tummy tuck to like fix the skin problem. And I was like, oh, gross. But regardless, like personal training is really expensive. I personally don't feel that I have the money to do that. And like, let's be real, I have no kids. And so like, I have money in the bank that I could theoretically use. Can you imagine if at this point, she had 3 children. How did she have the money and time to go and do this every day?
Because she was a lawyer, right? So she's making money, but also she was becoming famous from the Serial podcast. And so she was.
So she had bank. When you have bank, when you have money,
yeah,
you can make things happen. Well, this does not bode well for many people, many people in this country who are not financially capable of doing that, don't have childcare, don't have money in the bank to pay somebody. Like it's expensive.
Right. Yeah.
If you're looking for a career choice and you're into fitness, being a personal trainer sounds kind of lucrative, honestly.
Definitely.
And so like, that's the message that I took away from the book that made me sad, but that doesn't mean the book was terrible. It just meant that like that message was not something that I personally enjoyed. I did like the Pakistani
that message either, but I think I kind of overlooked that because I was just like so obsessed with the descriptions of the cuisine. And I think I called you one day. I blew $50 like
on Indian food,
on Indian food because I was just obsessed, and the obsession ran its course over 2 months.
Well, it's fun. So I took a picture for the gram. So keep your eye out or follow us on Instagram to see the feast of Indian food I ordered in preparation to read this book, because Mirele, you made me like super prepared. I mean, that's not to say I don't love Indian food. I absolutely do. Right. And actually there's a place around the corner from work that is Pakistani food. So I think we should have a Pakistani food date at some point.
We should.
But like that, it made me sad about food.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, it's just like a bad note to end on, Cheryl.
No.
Okay. Well, anyway, I'm happy to admit I'm happy to proclaim that my Pakistani Indian food addiction has subsided to healthy levels.
To normal.
It was intense.
Does your family like Indian food?
No. And so what I would do is I would order these giant meals. I would eat roast.
talk
So
about.
that's not
Wait,
really
wait, were you
healthy.
doing it in secret like she was, or were you doing it like out in the open? Like,
some of it was in secret because maybe I got something for somebody and then I ate it. Yeah.
I like that.
That's the problem with yummy food books.
Yes. I mean, I love food books. I do love food books.
Yeah.
Um,
This is something that I haven't read. I don't think I read a food book like this before. This is my first.
Oh gosh, we can make
Food
some
book.
recommendations for specifically for food books. So we usually on Instagram do, if you like this, you'll like these other books, but we'll do a specific one for food books because I have many.
Okay, so give me
many
some
food
recommendations
books.
because this is the first food book that I remember reading.
Okay.
Yeah, this was my first foray into
Well,
food
and
book
we should
genre.
also say this is the first book we read where when we are recording this and when it will probably be released, the book is not published yet. So we were very lucky as librarians. We got to go to the American Library Association National Conference in Washington, D.C., which is in our neck of the woods. And this past June, which is June 2022. And fortunate for us, there are lots of amazing publishers who hand out advanced reading copies of lots and lots and lots of books. And so this was one that Mirele actually received from
Someone
a publisher.
just handed it to me randomly.
I mean, talk about like amazing times. Like they just hand you books and you're like, oh yes, thank you. You have to bring like a suitcase so you can store all these books they give you, and we have lots of
you're
tricks.
the one who keeps all the arcs. I don't really keep the arcs, but this one has such an engaging cover and such a funny title that I was drawn to it.
So we can describe it for you, but we'll post pictures too, like we always do. But it's bright yellow.
It's my favorite color.
And like Fatty Fatty Boom Boom is like, it's very, it's a red and green with like gold accents, like very much like what you would think a like sari or I'm going to say this wrong and I really apologize, a shalwar kameez looks like in Pakistan. And they talk about the fashion too in Pakistan. And so like it's the letters are those, it's very stylistic and it's kind of gorgeous.
It's an attractive cover.
Yeah.
I was drawn by the cover.
And so originally Mirele had a different book that we were going to read for nonfiction. And then she like texted me and she's like, nope, we're doing this book.
Yeah.
And I was like, it's not even out yet. It gets released. I think it says November 8th, 2022. So if this drops on October 15th, like it is supposed to, this book hasn't come out yet. So you can pre-order it if you are interested, or you can wait till November when it is released, but it's not even out yet.
I like the writing so much. This is the first print book that I have read, print, not done Audible, in maybe 6 years.
That's impressive.
That's how.
Just because of the cover?
No, well, I didn't, first of all, they didn't have it on Audible. I was looking.
Well, it's because it's not out
but
yet.
It's not out yet. I had it kind of like a bathroom book, and
I would like to say I'm not surprised, in part because that book is clearly somebody dropped it in water.
And
It was kind of like,
I kind of started, I was like, because where I got this book, I got it at a professional development session for librarians about how to fit more reading into your life. So, and then they were handing out all these arcs and they handed this one. So I was like, you know what, I'm going to have like, we're fortunate we have more than one bathroom. So like every bathroom is going to have a different novel in it. And I will make my way through. I started reading this and I killed this book in 2 or 3 days, which for me is really unheard of. I'm a very slow reader and I don't have a lot of time when people aren't bothering me, which is why I listen to audiobooks. But I read this in print and it was delightful, other than the saliva that would fall on the book from my drooling.
oh, gross.
I wanted to eat.
You're telling me
everything.
about this now after I've already touched that
You've
book and read it.
touched
So gross.
and read it. Yeah, it fell in water and I spit on it.
Thank you. That was delightful to hear.
Well, thank you for indulging me. And
Of course. I definitely have read some books this season that I would not have read before.
yeah,
And
likewise.
this is our last episode of season 1.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
If I think about it too much, I'll start to tear up because this has been really a joy. It's a joy because like at work, I feel we don't get to really talk about books that we read together because
We're too busy doing other
get
things.
interrupted. Like we certainly talk to the kids about what they're reading and that's fun, but it's really nice to pun, be on the same page with you. And we have witty banter, and it's been really, really enjoyable. And if it weren't for my insane schedule.
So let's inform all of our listeners the sad news for season
It
2.
is sad news.
Y'all, it makes me so sad. I mean, I'm so lucky that I still get to see you every day, and so that's not sad, but it's sad because Mirele is going to take a step back and she's not going to be a part of Forever Shelfmates in season 2. And that's because she has an insane amount of things going on.
I wouldn't say insane.
Okay, fine. She's very busy.
I'm expecting my 4th child, and all my kids are kind of close together and starting to be people, and people have activities and play dates and things.
Yes.
And we are
She's
finding it hard to find time for this. At least I am.
For the time being.
For the time being. Never say never.
I will say that this first season has been so much fun. And even though we've only been releasing episodes for like 6 months at this point, we've been recording them for like a year.
Yeah.
And so
It's
this
been a
has
journey.
has been so much fun. Even if I hate the book, which let's be real, there've been a bunch of books I have not liked, but it has been so much fun. And so there's just no one who could ever replace Mirele in my heart or as my co-host.
And I want to thank you so much, Cheryl, because this whole idea came from you, and the creativity, the originality, the amount of effort and time that you put into this, the Instagram and getting followers. I mean, we even had a post from a follower we don't know.
I know that was
Like,
amazing.
that
Whoever
was
you are,
exciting.
you are awesome.
We
And
love
we
you.
appreciate you. In fact, we appreciate all of you listening out there.
All of you who listen, thank you so much for your support and your love, and for putting up with us.
I mean, to be fair, I would do this even if we had no listeners because it's just so much fun.
Well, in the beginning, we kind of did have
which
no
is fine,
listeners.
which is fine. I'm still certain that
It was
like
fun.
there are not that many listeners, but however many there are, and wherever you are, we appreciate you so incredibly much. And this has been such a fun ride. And we look every time someone comments, we get so excited that you have an opinion about something, and it makes us excited too.
Right. So keep up the reading and keep following for season 2. I know I will be in the middle of the night with this new baby, listening to episodes of what this turns into. So Forever Shelfmates may morph in season 2 into something
We're
different,
going
but
to,
equally wonderful.
oh God, don't look at me like that.
Stop.
So sad.
Now we're going to go cry and have Pakistani food.
Oh, goodness. That's all we have for you about Fatty Fatty Boom Boom by Rabia Chaudry. Forever Shelfmates is produced in collaboration with an incredible team of people. Our logo was designed by Mirele and Miriam Goldell. Our theme song was written by Mirele and Noah Sofsky and was performed by Abby Chestnut. Our producer is Aaron Adams, Benevolent Overlord, and our show is hosted by Mirele and me, Cheryl Fox Strasberg. That's all we have for you this time. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at Forever Shelfmates for the most up-to-date news on production. Thank you for listening.